AI is a debate we should all be having, and mostly are not. It is already reshaping how companies work, where they invest, and what happens to our jobs. The scale of the money is unprecedented, and no one knows when the bubble will burst. And the technology is still accelerating past AGI, matching human intelligence toward what some call artificial superintelligence, the last thing we will ever need to invent. How we want to live alongside that is not a question for companies alone. It is a question for all of us. Which brings me to one important perspective on it. On the 10th of August 2026, Mark Zuckerberg published about 6,500 words on the future of superintelligence. If you opened it and expecting what a chief executive normally writes, like a product roadmap, a note to investor, a story about where the profits will come from, you would have been surprised. Because this is not that. It is a philosophy. It argues for a theory of prosperity, a theory of safety, and a whole account of how power should be arranged in a world where machines can invent faster than people can. Zuckerberg has said Meta will spend, in his own word, hundreds of billions of dollars on the compute for superintelligence. Compare that to Europe's answer. Last October, the European Commission launched a €1 billion strategy to get AI adopted across healthcare, energy, and other sectors. One company in one country can commit to its own vision of machine intelligence on a scale a whole continent struggles to match. Zuckerberg is not the first tech billionaire to publish his view of how the world should work, instead of a description of what his company sells. This has become a recognizable form. Peter Thiel has spent 20 years writing about civilization and in philosophical and almost theological terms. In a 2009 essay for the Cato Institute, he wrote, and I am quoting him, "I no longer believe that freedom and democracy are compatible." Alex Karp, who runs Palantir, published a book last year that reads less like a corporate document and more like a manifesto about hard power and the future of the West. Critics of Palantir put it simply. Instead of sticking to product announcement, the company advances a worldview. Let's be clear, Zuckerberg is not Thiel and is not Karp. His essay is not far-right. Its tone is closer to optimistic liberalism than to the darker strands you find in some of the others. Putting him in this company is not an accusation that they share an ideology. It is an observation that they share a similar method. It is a very powerful person using a long public text to lay out how the world should be arranged and what role his company should play in arranging it. And let's not forget Elon Musk. He belongs here too, but from a slightly different angle. He's less the philosopher and more the doer. Look at his time running the Department of Government Efficiency. A personal view of what government should become for a while, actual government policy. Dodge drove the effective dismantling of USAID, the agency that distributed most of American foreign aid, and a federal court later found that shutdown likely unconstitutional. It oversaw the cancellation of more than 1,500 National Science Foundation research grants, many flagged simply for containing words tied to diversity or climate. I'll let you decide for yourself what you think of those actions. The point I'm trying to make here is when one person's view of the world is backed by enough power, it can reshape the institution that millions of people depend on, fast and with very little to check it. So back in 1965, a statistician named I.J. Good, who had worked with Alan Turing at Bletchley Park, described what he called an intelligence explosion. A machine smart enough to design better machines, which then design better machines again. In his word, the first ultra-intelligent machine is the last invention that man need ever make. But Good added a condition people often tend to forget. He said, provided the machine stays docile enough to tell us how to keep it under control. Then in 1993, Vernor Vinge gave the idea its modern name, the singularity, the point beyond which the future becomes genuinely hard to see. And in 2014, the philosopher Nick Bostrom turned the whole thing into a research program built around what he called the control problem. How do you keep a system far smarter than you aligned with what you actually want when it has no particular reason to comply? From Good to Bostrom, the same concerns keep resurfacing. Superintelligence holds enormous promise, but no one knows whether we will be able to control it. Here is what Zuckerberg does. He keeps the promise and he sets much of the worry aside. He reaches for the same optimism, the abundance, the invention, the cures, but it changes the danger. In his telling, the risk that matters is not that superintelligence slips out of human control, it is that it ends up concentrated in too few hands. Earlier thinkers focused on aligning superintelligence with human goals. Zuckerberg turns his attention to who will have access to it. The essay rests on this shift, which gives him his strongest argument while also revealing his biggest blind spot. So the first half of the essay is, I think, genuinely good, and dismissing it as public relation will be a mistake. Several of Zuckerberg's arguments are really persuasive, and some strike me as fundamentally right. Take his impatience with pure doom. He writes, "I do not understand why anyone who believes that AI will eliminate most jobs and much of humanity's relevance will rush to build that future." That is a fair challenge. If your picture of the future is genuinely catastrophic, then racing toward it needs an explanation, and a lot of the field has not offered one. His skepticism about concentrated benevolent power is even stronger. He writes that, hoping that an absolute power will benevolently provide for humanity, if sufficiently enlightened, has not led to safe or positive outcome. And again, it is hard to argue with that. And then the distinction I find most valuable, because it maps onto something I have argued about drug discovery for years. He says, invention, not automation, will be the greatest contribution of superintelligence. Early AI answers question and speed up the routine work. That is what we can call optimization, doing the thing you already do, but faster and cheaper. The bigger prize is discovery, I think. Finding medicines and materials that did not exist before. Optimization improves the world we have, invention expands it. On that, I think he's genuinely right. The diagnosis is convincing. The key questions are who gets access to superintelligence and what they should choose to use it for. I agree with much of the essay up to that point. My reservation begins when Zuckerberg explains how he thinks this problem should be solved. Zuckerberg's answer is broad distribution. Put superintelligence in everyone's hands and no single actor can monopolize its power. But this argument depends heavily on what he means by access. Start with a simple question. Does everyone actually means everyone? Because this is written by an American chief executive who spends the second half of his essay arguing for American leadership, for cheap export control, for slowing foreign rivals. So everyone already has an asterisk. I will come back to that asterisk cost this year in real life, personal experience. But set the geopolitics aside for a second and look at what is actually handed to you. Access, permission to use a system. And access is not the same thing as power. There is access, you are allowed to use it. There is affordability, you can afford it. There is control, you can shape how it behaves. And there is ownership. You hold the model, the compute, the data, the rules. The essay hands out the first two very generously, but doesn't really address the second two. Meta can give billions of people access to a personal agent, while Meta keeps owning the model it runs on, the compute behind it, the data that trained it, and the business model that pays for it. A free service can be available to everyone on Earth and still be controlled in every way that matters by one company. Handing out access hands out use. It leaves ownership exactly where it was. The contradiction is hard to miss. Zuckerberg objects to concentrated power when someone else holds it. then presents Meta as the answer. Meta is a company primarily focused on building personal superintelligence for everyone. So the cure for concentrated power turns out to be a single founder-controlled platform, one of the largest companies in history, offering itself as the way everyone else avoids concentrated power. The structure he warns against and the structure he proposes to build are the same structure. That does not make him insincere. His conviction may be completely genuine, but sincerity is not governance mechanism. Checks and balances, the very principle he invokes, exist precisely so that outcomes do not depend on the character of whoever is in charge. And his essay asks us to depend on exactly that character. The personal agent shows what this vision will mean in practice. Zuckerberg described a system that works, in his words, 24/7 on your behalf, helping with your relationship, health, career, and finance. To do that effectively, it will need to know almost everything about you. The more of your life it can see, the more useful it becomes. That will make it the most powerful intermediary ever built. Every earlier one, the search engine, the feed, they're also a slice of you. This one sees the whole of your life. It promises privacy, a private mode where even Meta cannot see your information. But here is the question the essay does not answer. How is a free agent for billions of people actually paid for? Because Meta's incentives are not really neutral. Last quarter of Meta's $60.8 billion in revenue, about $59 billion came from advertising, so that's 98%. That does not prove the agent will carry ads, but the company whose entire engine is the shaping of attention is now proposing to build the most intimate intermediary in your life, and it has not told us how those two things are kept apart. The most effective advertising system ever built will not look like an ad. It will look like a trusted assistant that knows your weaknesses and decides on your behalf which option to mention first and which to leave out. Now, the place I care about most in this whole essay is biology. That is where my own background is. I have used AI tools intensively since they became usable by people who are not engineers, and where that meets my work is in drug discovery and development. When Zuckerberg writes that superintelligence will help discover new drugs to cure a family member's disease, he's naming the application I care about the most. And here, he genuinely has skin in the game through the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative and BioHub. He has founded open models of the cells and a virtual immune system, real work aimed at, in his word, curing or preventing all diseases this century. I would rather live in a world where a founder puts that kind of money at curing disease than one where he does not. But where I am not sure is when he started talking about the personal biologist. The idea that each of us become our own clinician, because that reads to me like an engineer looking at biology as just another engineering problem. And my bias as a scientist shows here. I do not think biology is just another engineering problem. What I do believe is that superintelligence gives trained scientists superpowers. I recently recorded a Tech and Drug podcast episode with Matthew Bourdainx, a neuroscientist at the University College London who helped validate results from an autonomous AI scientist called Cosmos. He told me it is, quote, drastically changing how I work. That is a trained expert being amplified by an AI tool. It is not a layperson being turned into a biologist. Those are very different claims, and Zuckerberg essay tends to blur them. Biology makes the ownership problem more important because a system that formulates treatment for you has to be trained on the most sensitive data, your genome, your health records. Whose data trains it? Who holds it afterward? And who profits from what it learns? I wouldn't want a health insurance being able to send me ads through my personal AI assistant. Now back to that asterisk on the word everyone. Because we stopped being hypothetical this year. In June 2026, the US Commerce Department ordered Anthropic to block all foreign nationals from using its two most advanced models on national security grounds. And to comply, the company had to switch those models off for every customer. Access came back only at the end of the month once the government was satisfied. Whatever you think about the security reasoning, That episode showed something the essay tend to gloss over. Frontier AI access is now a foreign policy lever. It can be switched off for entire country, including allies, by decision taken in one capital. And that is where my concern, especially for Europe, comes in. And it is not really abstract. If the leading systems are American and access can be pulled as an instrument of statecraft, then depending on those systems is not the same thing as being empowered by them. Consider a European hospital or company built around a model it cannot control or audit, with no guarantee that access will remain available next year. What looks like a powerful new capability also creates a serious strategic dependency. Europe has already made progress on regulation. Its next task is to develop alternatives it can actually own and govern. So much of what we hear about AI's future comes from the people with the greatest financial stake in building it. Their views deserve to be taken seriously, along with the incentives behind them. A remarkably small group is shaping the conversation, and its worldview aligns neatly with its business interests. Now everyone has a stake in how this goes. It touches all of us. What most of us do not have is financial skin in the game. The equity, the compute, the lab, the capital to build an alternative if we do not like the one on offer. And the people without that particular stake are worth listening to, precisely because their judgment is not underwritten by the outcome. The Vatican has become one of the clearest of those voices. In his encyclical this year, Pope Leo XIV wrote that, I quote, "A more moral AI is not enough if that morality is determined by a few. And that AI tends to amplify the power of those who already possesses economic resources, expertise, and access to data. That is the access versus power argument made by someone with no equity to protect." So let me tell you where I actually land. We are living through an acceleration with no precedent. This is not one more technology arriving on the usual curve. It touches every part of a life at once, and it is the first technology built to be better than we are at one thing we have always used to stay in control, which is thinking. What concerns me most is who will control it. This technology is being built by private companies whose resources and reach increasingly rival those of governments. Private industry drove earlier technological revolution as well, but the state eventually developed the capacity to regulate and counterbalance that power. Standard Oil was broken up, AT&T was broken up, railways and telephones were brought under public regulation because society decided infrastructure that important could not be left to whoever happened to own it. Two things made that possible. There was time, because those technologies spread over decades. And there was a shared understanding that concentrated private power over essential infrastructure was a problem to be managed. Neither of those is reliably true now. The timescale has collapsed, and a single company can outspend an entire continent. My honest view is the one that fits any technology this big. The potential benefits are close to unlimited, and so are the potential dangers. I'm not a doomer, and I'm not a boomer. I believe this technology could dramatically shorten the path to new medicine and save extraordinary number of lives. I am equally conscious that power, this concentrated, moving at this speed, could cause harm on the same scale. Both possibilities are real, and any honest view of the future has to hold them together. What I am certain of is that this cannot be left to a few actors who happen to have the means to shape it. This is not about their character, it is about legitimacy. Decisions that will touch every person alive should not be made only by the handful of people with the capital to make them, however well-intentioned they are. And that is exactly why I think you should read Zuckerberg's essay, and Thiel and Karp. Not because they are right, but because they are the people steering, and you cannot push back on a direction you have not bothered to understand. The tools the rest of us have are the ordinary one, and I know it sounds naive to say them out loud. We vote, we push policymakers, we insist this is a public decision and not a private privilege. The lobbying is heavy and the asymmetry is real. And even in a democracy, These are the only instruments we have, and they only work if enough of us understand what is at stake well enough to actually use them. That is the whole reason I made this. For the first time, we are facing a technology that reaches into every field and every life. Forming your own informed view of it is no longer optional, and it is no longer academic. It is urgent, and it is something each of us have to do for ourselves, because the people who will otherwise decide it for us are already writing their essays. So if you found this useful, the full written version with all the resources, sources and reference is linked below. I would like to hear what you disagree, so leave a comment and let's talk about it.